Kia ora. Each year I read the Auckland Church Leaders' Easter Message. It's addressed to the people of Auckland. And there's a lengthy list of signatories at the end of these letters, mostly from pastors of fundamentalist churches, but also ministers from most mainline denominations. We don't know from year to year who writes it, and therefore whom we might want to dispute with. Each year I look for something worthwhile in it, something that gives a little bit of hope. And each year I cringe, for the hope recipe it offers is invariably simply to believe what everybody knows literally doesn't happen. Dead bodies don't come back to life. They stay dead. Easter is a symbol of transformation, a story to live, a call to action. It's not about one dead body coming back to life some 42 hours later, not 3 days, do the maths. Walking through locked doors for up to 40 days, only then to ascend up to heaven, which was said to be in the sky, which was said to be where God was to dwell. Even if that was literally true, what does it prove? What hope does that offer? Does it mean that when we die, we might go to be with Jesus up in the sky? If so, is that what Christianity is about? Hope in an afterlife? I believe Easter is about finding hope in this life, here and now, finding the sort of love that liberates us from the captivities of fear, a quality of love that is stronger than affection, a love that changes us and can change the world. Today I want to do a brisk walk through the appearance tradition. These are the so-called sightings of the resurrected Jesus. So let's start with what is probably the earliest in the New Testament, Paul. For Paul, like in his great hymn in Philippians 2, the resurrection is not a physical event, but an exaltation. Jesus' actions and teaching, especially his being a human and suffering, are why he's exalted. There's no empty tomb for Paul or physical resurrection. When Paul refers to Jesus being raised, he is referring to a spiritual body, whatever that precisely means. Paul equates his experiences of seeing Jesus and thus conferring apostleship. I'm talking about the episode Acts 2 calls On the Damascus Road. Paul equates this on a par with the experience of those in the Gospels, like Mary and Peter and many more than 12 others. Next, let's walk to the Gospel of Mark, the next earliest. The original ending has no appearance of a risen Jesus. Instead, 3 women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, go to the tomb, find the stone has been rolled away, and a messenger, angel, dressed in white, saying, "Fear not. Jesus has been raised and is going ahead of you to Galilee." Note the passive verb. Jesus was raised. God does the raising. God is the one vindicating all that Jesus was and did. God is the one exalting him. Later, the passive verb would evolve into an active verb. So it was Jesus who did the rising. Next, Gospel of Matthew. Now here there's some seemingly weird stuff. Like after Jesus breathed his last, tombs in cemeteries split open, and dead bodies of saints got up and walked around. Dom Crossan tells us this was part of a larger narrative common in the Eastern Church, where Jesus' resurrection or vindication was part of a universal resurrection. Seen, for example, in the icon where Jesus descends to Hades and grasps the hand of Adam and Eve. Crossan writes, the crucifixion and resurrection offer us a parable. It's not literal history, a parable, bigger than ourselves, when Christ, rising from the dead after being executed for non-violent resistance, grasps the hands of Adam and Eve, a parable of possibility and a metaphor of hope for all humanity is created. Adam and Eve being the symbolic parents of all humanity. So, in plain language, if God vindicates, exalts Jesus, so too God will vindicate, exalt all people, living and dead, who stand against violence, fear, and the myths of the powerful that support them. Back to Matthew. In chapter 28, he has a similar ending and probably dependent on Mark. 2 women, not 3, 2 show up to the tomb. The messenger, what we call angel, is a bit more dramatic, but the message is essentially the same. Don't fear, Jesus has been raised, going ahead of you to Galilee. Then Matthew includes a Galilee scene on a mountain where the 11 just gather and the risen Jesus commissions them to make disciples of all nations, baptizing and teaching. Interestingly, the text says the 11 worshipped him, but some doubted. Why worship? Luke 4 and 8 has Jesus saying, worship God alone. And why doubt? Especially when you're one of the 11, an insider. Crossan, in another of his books, alerts us that these appearance narratives seem to be endorsing certain people to be apostles, leaders in the emerging Jesus movements. We know the idea of 12 apostles, mirroring the 12 tribes of Israel, was a later development written back into the Gospels. And we also know from Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, that there were many more than 11 apostles. Paul says up to 500. Who are the 11 in the Gospels is also confusing. But it seems they are all male, which flies in the face of the first witnesses tradition, who were all female, except when you go into the Gospel of John, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we've done Paul and Mark and Matthew. Let's move on to Luke. Well, he seems to draw on sources other than Mark and that common source he has with Matthew. But he begins, like the others, with a stone rolled away from the tomb. Now with 2 messengers, 2 angels, who are more verbose, though without that direction to go to Galilee. He's going to do his commissioning in Jerusalem. And there are 3 women again. Mary, not Salome, but Joanna. Who these women are, we have no idea, really. And Luke's next episode is the women telling the 11 and all the rest. And Peter, rather than taking the word, goes and looks for himself. Luke's next episode is the standalone and unique resurrection parable called The Road to Emmaus, where a seemingly physical Jesus, who they don't recognize, walks and teaches 2 unknown followers, not part of the 11. Then, when stopped at an inn for refreshments, Jesus breaks and blesses the bread. The followers' eyes are opened, they recognize him, and he vanishes. The ability to be unrecognizable. And here we got to think not just physique, but voice, mannerisms. And to be able to vanish suddenly is hard to equate with the idea that this is the historical Jesus who suffered, died, and now has been brought back to life, revivified. Indeed, it points to a different kind of experience altogether. And the last Lucan episode has, following Matthew, Jesus suddenly being amongst the 11, but note with their companions, and 2 from the Emmaus Road, it's going to be a bigger group, telling them he's not a ghost, touches and eats, not ghostly, and then commissions them, like in Matthew. But unlike Matthew, this Luke has Jesus going up into heaven. Heaven being where God's meant to be. So, Paul, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John. The 4th Gospel. The appearance story has Mary Magdalene, just one woman, finding the empty tomb, but not initially meeting any angel. Instead, she runs off and tells the boys, Peter and an unnamed but beloved disciple. And then they run to the tomb, and the boys get there first. See, this is the whole boys first take on the tomb. The boys are running a race, as boys do. And they see some linen burial wrappings, but no angels. Yet Mary, who's also run back, she sees 2 angels who tease her with the question, Woman, why are you weeping? Then she turns and meets Jesus, the gardener, whom she doesn't recognize until he speaks her name. She's told not to touch him, which is the opposite of what later Thomas is told. The next Johannine episode is the risen Jesus passing somehow magically through locked doors to tell an indeterminate group of disciples not to be afraid. And importantly, to be breathed on, to receive the Holy Spirit. This is John's Pentecost. No Jesus ascending, Luke version, Jesus goes up, and 10 days later, Spirit comes up. The imparting of one's spirit to one's followers was a well-known trope. And think of Elijah and Elisha. But alas, Thomas isn't there. So there's another repeat episode, again through locked doors, which the risen Jesus walks through. The emphasis is on scars. There's no mention so far in the Bible about Jesus being nailed onto the cross. The Romans usually used rope. There's an emphasis too, this episode, on touching, unlike with Mary, and again on eating. Then lastly, there is my favourite appearance narrative, John 21, where Jesus tells a group of his male followers where to find the big fish. Then jumps ashore, cranks up the barbecue, and makes breakfast on the beach. Again, there is a conversation where they fail to recognize who Jesus is. And again, like in the other Gospels, this last appearance is a commissioning, but this time solely of Peter, reversing the narrative of a triadic betrayal. Well, that's where the biblical appearance tradition leaves us. And it's from this combined tradition stories that the church developed the Easter affirmation that Christ is risen. Whatever Easter literally was for his disciples, and if anything, it's a confusing picture, symbolically it meant that Jesus had been taken into God and vindicated, exalted, praised by God. It also meant that though his body was dead, somehow his life, his animating spirit, had transcended death and was still present. I would suggest that the appearance narratives are all stories to convey this death transcending presence, and are stripped of value when used to make impossible claims about a dead body. Like in these symbolic stories from so long ago, how we meet Jesus' ongoing presence varies from follower to follower, from one Christian tradition to another. The Bible gives us stories of individuals finding strength to overcome fear, finding that strength in themselves, or by rehearing the words of their mentor, or finding that strength by being together. A number of these stories also include food. To paraphrase Paul, when we are together, eating together, sharing together, it's as if his presence is among us. And a number of these stories are about commissioning, calling us out of our isolation, the isolation of our fears, and into a task, liberating us from crippling anxieties into a love that is powerful enough to bring freedom, non-violently topple oppressive regimes, and indeed give hope to people, all people, everywhere. Blessings to you this week.